So my name is Nahanni Fontaine, and I'm the Special Advisor on Aboriginal Women's Issues for the Aboriginal Issues Committee of Cabinet for Manitoba. I am from the Saugeen Anishinaabe First Nation. My mom's family is from that community, and my dad is Métis from Quebec. So, and I've been in this position for a couple of years. I advise the government on Aboriginal women's issues, and with my primary focus on missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. And so I guess that's what I'll talk about today. I've been working on the issue of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls since probably 2002. And what I like to do sometimes is I like to provide kind of that historical background and then kind of bring us up to today and where we are, where we're kind of situated with the discourse and the reality of this issue. So, when you look at, oftentimes when you look at the discourse, so the way people talk about missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls, in the beginning, it was very isolated. And so that it was only the families that spoke about it in the context of their particular loved one. So, Jane is missing, or Jane has been murdered. And that shifted beginning around 2002 when the president of the Native Women's Association of Canada, which is the national organization that represents Aboriginal women across Canada, or NWAC, the president at the time was Terry Brown. And this issue was becoming more and more apparent to her. And it's really Terry Brown that kind of solidified it into an education campaign. And that was called Sisters in Spirit. And I remember back in February 2003, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it's 3. There was a bunch of us. I was working at the Southern Chiefs organization at the time. And at the time, the federal government was under the Liberals. And the Liberals were trying to enact pieces of legislation. They were called the First Nations Governance Act. It was a series of different legislation that they were trying to push through Parliament to get passed. And at that time, there was just a myriad of different Aboriginal groups that kind of solidified working together and really executed just a great lobbying strategy. Which included a bunch of things, from going down to Parliament Hill during the standing committee hearings, to meetings, to rallies, to all kinds of things. And what we did here in Manitoba at Southern Chiefs Organization was we organized a delegation of chiefs and some other women leadership to go to Europe for 2 weeks. And I was the one that helped coordinate that whole trip. And we went to, we were at the United Nations in Geneva, so we were at the Human Rights Commission. We were at the European Union in Brussels. We met with the French Senate in Paris. We met with a variety of different NGOs at the time. And everywhere we went, there was 4 women. There was myself, the Grand Chief at the time, Leslie Spillett, and Denise Cook. And everywhere we went, we also spoke about, the women would also talk about this issue of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. And really nobody had been talking about it at that point internationally, because everywhere we went, people couldn't believe it, right? Because Canada has this reputation as really one of the best places in the world to live, which in many respects is true for different segments of the population, not necessarily for our population, for our people. And so I remember those discussions, talking with a variety of different people and saying, well, this is what's going on in Canada. And again, just kind of the disbelief that there were all these missing and murdered women across Canada. then from then on, there was a new election at NWAC, and the new president, Bev Jacobs, really took Sisters in Spirit and kind of ran with it, and brought it to the UN at the different, every year at the United Nations headquarters in New York, there's a permanent, it's a gathering for Indigenous peoples around the world. It's called the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And she was one of the people under NWAC that really brought this issue of missing and murder to that international level. And then across Canada, you started to gain a little bit more media attention to this issue. When you look at the evolution of the discourse and the awareness and the public awareness of this issue, I always try to go back to that it was really the families that brought this issue. For years and years and years, mothers or grandmothers or sisters or brothers or dads or cousins, when their particular loved one would go missing, they would go to, and this is across Canada, they would go to whatever particular policing institution and say, look, like, Jane is gone, and Julia wouldn't do this, and we know that, Denise wouldn't go missing. She just wouldn't do that. And a lot of times, many times, the police response was, well, she just doesn't want to be found, or she's on a drunk, she'll come back, or just a variety of kind of dismissive excuses. But family members, as you can well imagine, kept persisting. Like, no, there's something going on, and you are the police, you're supposed to investigate this, and kept persisting. If those family members had not persisted and had not shown such courage and dedication and love to their particular loved one, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this today, because it would have just eventually just more women or girls would go missing and murdered, but it would just wane out. Then Aboriginal women's organizations like NWAC started to get on board and started to support their sisters, that this is an issue that that they need to stand behind. And so you see the discourse and the public awareness really start to elevate, to kind of progress. Then that kind of evolution was that non-Aboriginal women's organizations started to get on board and start to say, like, we're going to stand in solidarity with Aboriginal women's organizations and Aboriginal women who have gone missing and murdered. So that propelled the issue even a little bit further in the public discourse. And then, to me, right now, how I've seen it kind of evolve is that now we're in a space where male leadership and government have acknowledged that this is an issue, that it's no longer you can just sweep it under the carpet, that this is a bona fide issue that needs attention. And that, to me, has kind of come simultaneously. And so that now we have, the Assembly of First Nations and, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and, the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations, all of these different, they're called provincial territorial organizations or national organizations, are talking about and bringing attention on missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. So you see historically really this kind of progression, that now we're in this space that, we have currently the opposition in government, in the federal government, calling upon the Conservatives for a national inquiry. We have different jurisdictions across the country that have, people that are assigned to work on this issue, or it's in some way ingrained into their provincial mandate, however that's kind of executed across the country. That was unheard of 15 years ago. So, I know that oftentimes people will say, well, nothing's really changed. And that's not true, because it has. Starting with families, persistence, and again, their courage and their absolute love, to where we are now that it's on the public record. And, just in April 2013, all the Aboriginal ministers from across Canada along with the 5 national Aboriginal organizations, you collectively called upon the federal government to commission a public inquiry into missing and murdered. So it's not, in my mind, based on what I've seen from the very beginning, it's unfair to say that nothing's changed. There's real commitment to this issue. There's commitment to the families. And more importantly, there's commitment to the women and the girls whose lives are lost or missing. The other piece that I think is really important to understand about, the whole issue of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls in Canada is this notion, this public discourse, which we've been all trying to kind of shift and change, but this public discourse that, well, they did that to themselves. They put themselves at risk. You'll hear, their lives, their high risk lifestyles. So when you do a discourse analysis on that, when you look at that, that's essentially shifting blame to these women and girls that have gone missing or murdered. As if one morning, somebody wakes up and says, yeah, I'm going to, cognitively, strategically and methodically put myself in a place where I'm going to go missing or murdered. Nobody does that. And the other piece that it does is that it then dismisses and really just makes invisible the perpetrator and the predators that are on our streets all across Canada that strategically target and prey upon Aboriginal women and girls. They're kind of invisible in this whole thing when we use that discourse of, these high-risk lifestyles. They're invisible. But really, they're predators. And they have sought their prey, and they have done whatever they've done to their prey. And I think it's really important to always shift that back to, no, these women didn't strategically, methodically put themselves so that they could disappear and be murdered. It's because we have these people on the streets. The other piece is that, a lot of people with missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls, there's this kind of this belief that all of the women and girls that have gone missing and murdered were prostitutes or sex trade workers. Now, those are 2 words that I loathe. I absolutely loathe those because, again, there's so much power in discourse and in the words that we use. That, again, those words implicitly blame the woman. And I always say this, that nobody, when you're a little girl, grows up and thinks, yeah, I think for a career I want to be a prostitute. No little girl thinks that. It is a consequence of a myriad of precipitating events that have brought that woman or that little girl to where she's being sexually exploited. So, one of the things that I always try and challenge people every time that I'm asked to come and speak on this issue is, to shift your discourse, right? Don't use the words prostitute or sex trade worker. Sexually exploited woman, sexually exploited girl, sexually exploited boy. Nobody chooses that lifestyle. So, I think that is starting to shift as well. There was a time when, not so long ago, in 2007, 2009, where the media, there was some young women, again, 2 17-year-olds and an 18-year-old who were murdered. And the discourse around them was that they were prostitutes. No, they're just little girls. They're just little girls. You're 17. You're just a little girl. And that's what they are. But somehow we think it's okay to just blame them. So I really, really do, always try and encourage and challenge people to shift your discourse and never use those words.